brought to you almost live from the Dude in the Basement Studios. Why? Because that's where the good stuff is. It's Sips, Suds, and Smokes with your smoking host, the good old boys. Suds. It's time for more Suds.
Hello and welcome to this Suds segment. And today, this Suds segment is all about sour beers. Here on our Suds segments, everything good in life is worth discussing. And this is good old boy Mike. And joining me for this episode are going to be good old boy Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And good old gal Julieanna.
Hi, folks.
And Reverend Mark.
Hello.
It's good to get the gang back together again. And I'm so glad to definitely have Julieanna back with us. She's not joined us for a couple of episodes, and this is definitely right in your wheelhouse, isn't it?
Aw, thank you.
You're a sour beer queen.
I am.
That's a compliment, right?
She's very sour.
Well, if you've not heard our show before, our Suds segments are all about beer, and more beer. And today beers that we're going to go through are going to be all sour beers. Rodenbach Grand Cru, Kriek, Mandarin, Parfait, Strubbes, and Alvinne Undressed are the four beers that we're going through in this segment today. We'll be tasting and discussing these beers and rating them with beer ratings, plus our signature belch sounds. And those ratings are, number 1, that sucks, get me anything but a butt. Number 2, was that a belch? Number 3, what a relief. We're going to blame that one on John Malone, aren't we? Number 4, a body should really not make that sound. And everyone's all-time favorite, number 5, listen to that hang time, give me another.
Nice.
Finally got that out of my system. So those are our belch ratings, our Suds ratings here on Sips, Suds, and Smokes. Very interesting category that we're going to get to go through today. And if you have not had sour beers, this is the Sour Beer 101 show. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what is a sour beer, because there are some things that I would say are tart, but are definitely not sour beers. And we'll, in this particular show, these are all traditional sour beers. So sour beers are not that common in the U.S. as yet, and outside of Europe, they're not that popular as many other styles of beer. And that's not to say they're not enjoyable, and I would say the Belgians are hogging all the good stuff across the board, not just sour beers. We like their women,
absolutely.
too.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Unlike traditional beer brewing, which is done in a sterile environment to guard against the intrusion of wild yeast, sour beers are made by allowing wild yeast strains or bacteria into the brew. Traditional Belgian brewers allowed wild yeast to enter the brew naturally through the barrels, an unpredictable process that many modern brewers avoid. I'm wondering how that goes. I mean, do you set the barrel out in the field and go, "Hey boys, come on over here, get on board, wild yeast, right here, come on." It's like a cowbell moment, Come on down, Everybody kind of saddle up to the show.
Well, I think that the Belgian lambic style evolved around breweries that were on the Seine River, for one thing. So it's I think it's some of it's yeast that's particular to that area. I mean, it can be found elsewhere, obviously.
So and we'll talk about this in a second. So do the strains of bacteria, do they all trace some heritage back regionally to that river or that river gorge?
I think that those. Valley. I'm not a microbiologist, so,
you're big bag.
But I would give an educated or maybe an uneducated guess to say that these yeast strains can be found anywhere, but they're very prolific and reliable in that area where those breweries were set up.
That'd be an interesting thing for one of our listeners that may know that, and look at some lineage characteristics, taking those these bacterial strains that we're going to talk about right now. So the most common agents for creating sour beers are lactobacillus, Brettanomyces, or called Brett, is how we'll be saying that quite a bit today, and Pediococcus. And I will tell you, if you sit down and look up where these bacterial strains are normally found in life, pretty scary.
A little bit, yeah.
Doesn't make
nasty.
you too thirsty, yeah.
Yeah. You go, I think I'll pass on that. But not all bacteria is bad. And in this case, it's used for creating a food product, and in this case, beer, much the same way that molds and yeast and other things are used in the production of other food products as well. So another method for achieving the tart flavor is by adding fruit, most commonly cherries, and there's a style called Kriek, which we're having today. Then there is Frambrosia, which is by adding raspberries during the aging processes, and this causes a second fermentation. And there's a couple more styles. Farro, which means you actually add sugar and a secondary fermentation, and everybody's favorite, which is Gouze, which my colleagues here are finally seeing the hand gesture that's appropriate for this. So you'll have to look that up and see, other people as they say Gouze and throw their hands out.
I'll never say it the old way again. So.
Oh well, I
Yes.
know.
We have been formally educated now. Yes.
Other fruits are used as well, but as you pointed out already, it's the cherry and the raspberry that have more strength and add more tartness than, like, say, there's a peach is fairly popular, but that adds more of a sugar, and it rounds it off a little bit in a different way.
Same with grapes, too. I think a lot of people do it with the wine grapes these days.
That's correct, and we actually have had some other beers that have that point of crossover in between characteristics of how wine is created, and especially aged in wine barrels and sour beers. And I really thought that was an interesting crossover moment in looking at characteristics of winemaking and beer making, and basically how they kind of intersected, both in a combination of ingredients as well as the way that they were actually aging the product itself. So, well, because of the uncertainty involved in using wild yeast, the sour beer brewing process is extremely unpredictable, and the beer takes months to ferment and can take years to mature. And I know that some of you have made sour beers as home brewers, and it really takes a marathon moment, doesn't it?
Well, it takes a lot of patience. In a way, I enjoy brewing. I don't brew lambics that often. Maybe every other year I'll get a batch and then experiment with different kinds of fruit, kind of split it off into different secondaries. But the brew day itself, to me, is quite enjoyable because I don't have to worry about sanitation.
There you go.
No, but I do. I mean, it's not that I don't practice those procedures no matter what, but you're less on edge about that. Because if it gets infected, who's going to know?
Well, one of the other main characteristics of lambics is how they treat their hops. How did you do your hops when you brew your lambics?
I actually make sure that I stick hops back, and I have about 7 ounces right now of Styrian Goldings, which I wish they were fresh because you can't find those anymore, at least in leaf style. And I will just leave them open, like in my garage or something, and let them just dry out. Put them in an attic, but you basically want
no hop flavor, no hop aroma.
No.
They're just a preservative at that point.
Well, I think that other things that I've heard about creating sour beers is things like exploding carboys. And it just creates a volume of beer that I think I've heard some people really struggle with, in dealing with sour beers. And just the long-term storage, component of it is usually what just wears everybody out and says, I'm just not set up to, throw stuff in a barrel, for a year or more. So
I use plastic pails.
Huh.
Yeah. And then once I get it into like a...
Well, it definitely doesn't infuse any flavor.
No, but no. But then I might eventually get it like into a tertiary. Like the secondary is where the fruit is, and then I might put it into a tertiary, and then at that point I might want to add an oak stave or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, this unpredictable process makes it difficult to maintain the consistency from one batch to the next, and the economics just don't work well for brewing on a macro scale. So some brewers have figured this out, like Rodenbach, which we're having here today, in Belgium, producing great sour beer since 1836. And there are also distinct characteristics of having aged and non-aged beers in this style of beer as well. So definitely some interesting moments about, hopefully you learned a couple of things about sour beers today, and we'll get to the 4 beers we're going to talk about and taste today as well. So up first is Rodenbach Grand Cru. We just talked about this. It is from Belgium. It is considered a sour brown and red. It is ABV of 6%, widely distributed in the U.S. and available both on tap and in a bottle, are very common ways of finding this beer as well. One of the places that we've had on the show quite a bit is Craft Brewed in Nashville, and they actually serve Rodenbach on tap there a couple times. So one of the few places I know to find sours, certainly on tap, but it definitely does happen. And I would certainly say some of the places that we're declaring good belching zones are probably going to have, a one sour at least on tap as well, if not some great bottle choices. All right, so let's all chat about the Rodenbach Grand Cru here. So my tasting notes around the Rodenbach Grand Cru is, I thought it had great balance. I would say good balance, not great. Good sweet and sour, and just, an overall just good clean finish. Wasn't anything spectacular to write home about, but it was a good solid 3 on my SUDS rating for that. Good old boy Dave, what'd you think of Rodenbach Grand Cru?
I was kind of the same way. I think it lends itself to be sweeter, especially when it's cold, and the tartness comes out a bit more as it warms up. But we've talked about this on past shows, an introductory beer. So if you're someone who is interested in sours, this is a great first one to try because it's not gonna give you the pucker effect. I think the body, if I had one critique of it, the body and the mouthfeel come across as a bit thin to me, a little watery. But overall, I think it's a very good beer. I would give it a 3.
A 3 as well. What a relief. Julieanna, what did you think of Rodenbach Grand Cru?
Again, I echo what Dave says about this being a great introduction to somebody who's never had a sour before, because you get that vinegary aroma on the front, which is indicative of a sour, and then as it ends on the palate, then there is a sweetness to it. So you're getting a bit of astringency to begin with to kind of get your taste buds used to what a sour can be, but it just gets soft at the end. And yeah, I'm kind of in the same vein of it being a bit thin, because to me a sour really isn't carbonated, and to me this is a little too carbonated for what I would want in a sour. So it is a little on the thin side, so I'm going to give this a 3 as well.
What a relief. Reverend Mark, what do you think of Rodenbach Grand Cru?
Well, my tasting notes start off by saying that I think it's the most approachable of the 4, and so it's kind of just reinforcing what has already been observed. That is, I think it's a lay-friendly beer. That is, someone who's just kind of getting into the world of beer. This isn't going to put you off too much. I do think it's got some good balance. I can get some of the oak notes in there as well. It is thin, but I think there's a good bit of wheat in these beers as well. So I don't really ding it for that. It's not a terribly high gravity beer either. I noticed that as it warmed up, it took on other kinds of kind of spice notes that I didn't get when it was cold. And I'm reminded that Michael Jackson, the sort of the beer guru of England and of the world, really, who's now deceased, labeled this as one of the best beers in the world. He called it the Burgundy of Belgium.
Huh. Well, I would certainly say, would you call it like a reference beer then? It's a
benchmark.
Sour?
It's a benchmark.
There you go.
Yeah. So in that regard, I would give it a 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
4. Body should really not make that sound.
Between 3 and a 4.
And we should be clear that when he says Michael Jackson, he does not mean the King of Pop.
No. Not at all.
Well, up next we have a Kriek style sour, and Krieks were the ones was a style of beer that's actually made with cherries, and this is a Kriek Mandarin Parfait. Hopefully, I'm saying that correct. This is widely available as well in bottles in the U.S., and it's. I've definitely seen it in restaurants, and you can definitely find it, all over the place. But definitely, it was totally had the pucker factor, going for me. In fact, I wrote, "Hello, cherries." Wow, super tart. And I actually said that I would open this for someone that I don't like. So my SUDS rating for this is number 1. That sucks. Give me anything but a bud. So I just, I don't think that's a reflection of the beer. I think that's probably more a reflection of the style. I'm just, I don't know. It was just way too tart for me. Good old boy Dave, what do you think of Kriek Mandarin Parfait?
Well, I was like completely opposite of you because I love Krieks. It is actually, I really like Framboise as well, but Krieks, to me, if you want something that is tart and gives you that nice pucker, because if you're into sours and you're into tart beers, that's what you're looking to get. And the first thing you notice about this beer is the beautiful red color. So if you pour it into a nice tulip glass or something, then you're going to see that really pretty cherry color come out. It has a nice dry finish. The aroma is tart and acidic the way it should be. I would give this one a 4.
Wow. A 4. A body should really not make that sound. Well, that's what I love about the contrast of always tasting beers together. Good old gal Julieanna, what do you think of Kriek Mandarin Parfait?
This is a favorite of mine, so to me it's perfect. Cherry and raspberries tend to be like the better flavors to use because they're so consistent, and no matter what bottle of this I open, from year to year, it's still the same consistency, and I really enjoy that. So yes, it has the pucker that you want, it's got the tartness, it's got the vinegariness, but you're still tasting the cherry underneath everything, and that to me makes a really good sour, is that you don't lose sight of the fruit and all the sourness that's going on. And
there's no mistake about what fruit it is.
No, not at all. It's very distinctive. And also an interesting thing about this style beer, if you want to call it beer, is that, you could save this for 20, 30 years. For those of us out there that have those basement bomb shelters, store a few bottles in here. They'll be just as perfect 25, 30 years from now for your grandkids as they are now.
They better not.
Maybe they just want to save it. Anyways.
Honey, could you pass the saltines and the Kriek, please?
Exactly. So for me, this is a good solid 4.
Wow. The body should really not make that sound. Reverend Mark, what do you think of Kriek Mandarin Parfait?
Well, first I'd like to say that, especially the Kriek is, for me at least, I appreciate one poured very cold. And it's even, I think, more enjoyable. It's an aesthetic thing in like a flute. And so I think that's part of it. It's just we eat and drink with our eyes. So that's one thing that would make it even, push it up even a little bit more. You get more of the nose as it warms up. I found that this particular one was, of course, very tart, and And I think it's always helpful to remember that there is a difference between tart and sour. So it's the tart that's kind of balancing over off against the sour as well within the beer. Also, I think because we're a very visual culture, that our sense of smell and taste are more repressed. And that means that oftentimes our smell and our taste triggers memory in a more sort of poignant way. And so when I sipped this, it reminded me of my mom's cherry pie. It just really took me back, took me way back.
Yeah.
So that kind of added to my enjoyment. I know also that these sometimes are barrel aged with cherries in which the pits are not even removed, so you can get some tannins in there as well. And I got a little bit of a tannic kind of aspect to it, but not off-putting. I mean, I think if it's there, it's very much in the background. So I think this is extremely well made. I think it's a question of whether you like it. I also think that this is a beer that is even more enjoyable in pairing it with something to eat. So I'd give it a 4.
4 as well. But I should really not make that sound. Well, that reminded me of a story that I had. I was out with some friends one night. We were having beers, and it was at a bar in Tampa. And this group, they didn't want to have anything high alcohol, and staring at this very long list at this particular bar, and they actually had Framboesa on tap. And so I'm sitting here, and of course, I'm the big, Belgian beer head, and I'm like, I'll have the quad. And they're like, I'll have the Framboesa, and I'm like, okay, you were a friend. Now I'm not quite sure where you are on the scale. And I just harassed them the whole night because I said, listen, every time, and they did. They came. The reason why it triggered me is you said, drinking this in a flute because they serve the Framboesa in a flute style. And so I made him throw up his pinky every single time he took a sip. I was like, look, I'm sorry, but every time you're going to drink that pretty pissant, raspberry beer, you're going to throw your pinky up, and I'm going to ask you to pick up your skirt every time, you have to move around the table. Because, anyway, I just, I was like, wow, what's the whole point? The beer was like 3.8% alcohol. I'm like, half a glass of water, I think it'd probably be more enjoyable.
You don't see a lot of guys drinking that in like a biker bar or something.
No.
Could be a first.
Yeah.
That'd be an interesting show.
Yeah.
Biker dudes who like Framboesa on That would be pretty funny. All right, our next beer is Strubbe. This is a Flemish red ale. Is classified as a sour red and brown. It is from Belgium. It don't have the ABV on this, but I think it was at 6.7%, I want to say, is what this is at. Widely available in the U.S., although very difficult to find. I would say that part of it is a supply and demand issue. So there's some regional distribution about this in the U.S. Maybe a little bit more difficult to locate this beer than some of the other ones we've talked about. But a great beer, a reference beer, I think, all the same. So my tasting notes on this are, that was well balanced, kind of ho-hum. If I had to pick anything as a good session sour, this would be at the top of my list. Something you could sit down and probably have, 2 or 3. This would probably be, in that category of something I would probably, would be very approachable having 2 or 3 of these. So my SUDS rating for this is going to be 3. What a relief. Good old boy Dave, what do you think of Strubbe's?
Yeah, I thought it was a very balanced beer. Now, and Mark may know a little bit more about this, but Flemish browns and Flemish reds, they're sort of the same beer, but they're kind of not. The reds have a red malt that they add into it, and then they're usually aged in oak barrels, where the browns, I don't think they really age them usually in oak. Is that right? Kind of.
I think that's right. And traditionally, these days everything seems to be aged.
True, yeah. But then the reds are usually the more sour of the two than the brown. I thought this was kind of in the middle of that. It wasn't overly sour, but it was a nice drinkable beer. I could sip on a glass of this and feel good about it. I thought it had a very good flavor and a little bit of an oaky finish at the end. I would give it a 3.
Yeah. A 3 as well. I would have relief. Good old gal, Julieanna. What do you think of Strubbe's? I'm probably saying it wrong as well.
So this is kind of interesting. I've had this once before and got a different flavor profile out of it than I did today. This has only been brewing since 2006, considering that the brewery itself has been around since the early 1800s. This is like part of a new incentive to try more interesting Flemish red and brown ales than their traditional beers that they were making, which were more of a Flemish Pilsner, for lack of a better word, because they were using different grains.
Wow.
So
that would be pretty wild.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like a dry red, when you said red Pilsner.
Yeah.
Or Flemish Pilsner.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually heard. No, I mean that's what I've heard.
My brain thinking about that. Oh my God.
Well, that's what I've heard they can be. So, anyways, it's a little sweet for me. It's sweeter than I expected. But yeah, like you said, it's a good session sour, for lack of good session sour. Just because it doesn't have a lot of complexity to it.
So what's your SUDS rating?
I'm going to go with the 3.
3 as well. What a relief. Reverend Mark, what you think of Strubbe's?
Well, I think it's interesting that we're introducing this beer as a session sour, which is sort of an oxymoron. And I think that pretty much kind of sets the parameters on where this beer is, where it's coming from. Is that it's not really a benchmark type sour, but it is again kind of like the Rodenbach in a sense. It's one that could be introduced to a person that's just kind of broadening their palate. I thought that there was, though, just kind of in the background as I sort of had the aftertaste, I could pick up more of that wild flora. I mean, it just, there was a musty kind of wildness that, it wasn't overwhelming, wasn't off-putting, but it was there. But like Julieanna said, there's a sweetness there too that I think makes it approachable, but it's not like completely dialed in to be the perfect sour. So I would give it, I'll be generous and give it a 3.
A 3 all the way around then. What a relief. So I think one of the things I remember is we had another sour on a episode earlier this year, and I think it's worthy at least of talking about it because we've mentioned introductory, sours. The one we had from Switzerland, the Alex Larogue, is definitely falls in that category.
Yeah.
I see Julieanna swooning, and me as well. I'm telling you, that was
That is badass.
That was a
good.
really
Yeah.
good. That was a very good beer, and I just I think it's worthy of talking about if you're thinking about approaching sours. I think we all agreed that was a gateway.
And it was
Yeah,
such a
sour beer.
pleasant surprise,
Yeah, it really
too.
was. Yeah, and I would have never said great sour beer from Switzerland. I still can't even believe I'm saying that now, but
It's okay.
yeah, I
It's
know.
neutral.
I know. We have all the gold.
And the chocolate.
Yeah. So next up is Alvinne Undressed, hopefully, or Alvinne, however you might pronounce that correctly. It is classified as a sour red brown as well from Belgium. This is ABV of 6.9%. Very broad distribution on this, although it was very difficult to find on a shelf. So while I think that a lot of distributors might be picking it up, that doesn't mean that the liquor stores or beer stores are necessarily keeping it in stock. Still worthy of discussion today, and I know that it's been very interesting watching all of our facial expressions around this one, which has been definitely hello Pucker City. So my tasting notes around Alvinne Undressed are, wow, this is too sour, and pucker up, baby. And in fact, at the risk of offending my colleagues here, I think you should actually blend the Kriek and the Alvinne Undressed.
Hey.
That even tastes more vile.
Beer cocktails.
Oh, man. I am not a beer blender. Anyway, so my SUDS rating for Alvinne Undressed is actually going to be a 1. That sucks getting anything but a bud. Good old boy Dave, what'd you think of Alvinne Undressed?
It's okay. It's definitely sour. Okay, if that's what they're shooting for, they hit the mark. It's sour. I don't know that it's overly sour. It's definitely on the higher end. The thing I don't like about it is that I don't get a lot of complexity and flavor from it. Even as it warms up, it just is sour. That being said, it's okay. I think I would probably give it a 2.
A 2. Was that a belch? Good old gal Julieanna, what do you think of Alvinne Undressed?
I didn't think my mouth, my face could contort like it did when I first tried it. And now that it's warmed up, I tried it again, and it's even worse.
Have you tried combining it with a Kriek?
I would not do that to such a wonderful flavor. Again, of note, it's interesting. This brewery has been open since 2003. The name of the brewery comes from a female spirit in folklore that is from that area.
We're not going to have to hold hands while we drink this, then, are we?
No, I think this woman needs to die and go away.
Wow.
Wow. Can we just say what your rating's going to be up front?
I think we found something more sour than the beer.
Wow.
If I could give it a negative number, I would, but we don't have that in our rating system, so I'm going with a painful 1.
Well, we'll also give that a boo right there behind it, too, so, you know. Yeah, just not going to work for you. All right. There you have it. Reverend Mark, what'd you think of Alvinne Undressed?
Well,
How do you follow that?
Yeah,
as I was taking my last sip, and Juliana caught me. The palate doesn't lie. You know,
He's twitching. Bring the paddles.
I have to back up a step or two before I'm too harsh, though, and say I recall something that Dave Miller said years ago, because he loathes and despises sour beers, but like on a BJCP approach to evaluating beer, that if he ever got sort of sequestered onto a sour beer table, that he would give the highest marks to the beer he found the most disgusting. And
I think that's
because that's sort of how he would gauge what's the best.
Yeah.
The best is what is worst to him. So for me, this one seemed to, you really would need to pair this with, like, I have to say that the flavor that came to mind with me, especially after it warmed up, and I just let kind of a spice aspect of it sort of settle into my throat. It was like gorgonzola. And I would think you'd have to have some really
Something that competes with
strong cheese to make this good.
that would mask the flavor of the beer, or the lack thereof.
Or that they would meld somehow in an interesting way.
I mean, in that sense, just have the cheese.
With Julieanna.
So
Definitely.
these kinds of beers are really, beyond my normal range of appetite just as a beer drinker. So I don't really feel like I have a super educated sort of way of lining these things up, say what's best, what's worst. I'll give it between a 2 and a 3.
Wow.
I want to, give it 2.
Yeah, we're going to give it a 2, definitely. Was that a belch? All right. Well, there you have it, all of our remarks around these 4 beers, and it was interesting talking about what are sour beers, and I think I learned a lot through this. This is definitely not a category that I've tasted a whole lot of, and hopefully our listeners definitely learned a lot along the way, especially how to throw your pinky up when you're having Frambrosia. Well, I want to thank my co-host for joining us. good old boy Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And good old gal Julieanna.
Thank you.
And Reverend Mark.
Cheers.
This good old boy Mike. I'm going to ask you to keep on sipping.
This has been a One Tan Hand production of Sips, Suds, and Smokes, a program devoted to the appreciation of some of the finer slices of life. From the Dude in the Basement Studios, your hosts, the Good Old Boys, will see y'all next time.